Justin, thank you again for taking some time out to speak with us this evening.
You're welcome.
We're thinking leadership, and I just want to start by asking you who for you, in your experience so far, represents a model of a great leader?
Well, answer. I mean, because I don't think of it in individual terms. I started working an organisation called Mars Confectionery. It's a family-owned American corporation, and they had a training scheme in the early 1980s, which I like to think so because I was part of it, created some really exceptional leaders.
Yes.
I joined as a graduate intake of 5 in 1983, and 4 of those 5 people became FTSE 100 chief execs. That's not a bad hit rate. And so my leadership inspiration really came from learning leadership in that organisation in the early days and seeing it in many, many people. It was an organisation that fundamentally believed that you started with fantastic raw material, again I would say that,
yes.
But then gave it the opportunity to flourish very quickly. We almost sort of, the first 10 years of your career was cut out. It was like one of those reality game shows. You got to Friday of your first week having done the kind of personnel thing and introduction and where the toilets are and all the things you do in your first week. And you got this envelope and you opened it up and it said Galaxy D shift Monday 6 a.m. And what that meant was that's what you're running. I turned up at 6 a.m. the following Monday in charge of Galaxy D shift and the 19 guys, because it was blokes, working on that shift. And I knew nothing about anything.
Yes.
But you learn pretty fast. And in that particular instance, I had my charge hand was a guy called Les Hampson, who was I think he was poisonous, and truth be told. I'm pretty sure he's not with us today, so I'm not defaming anyone that's alive. But there was a lot of stuff you learned at the knee of this guy who had worked for 30 years in the factory, and there wasn't anything he didn't know about his version of leadership. It's not one that would avoid you getting arrested in 2017, but it was pretty effective back in 1983.
Yes. Okay. So like being dumped at the deep end,
completely,
just having a go.
Because their attitude was, if you're good enough, you're old enough, and we're going to wrap a lot of. We did a tremendous amount of off-the-job training. You were given, if you like, a lot of technical skills to be a leader, but then you were given the opportunity to play and experiment. And it was an organisation that didn't mind failure. It had no fear of failure.
Yeah.
Kind of the only failure that was unacceptable was the same mistake made twice for the same reasons. Philosophically, that's something I still believe in. I think that too many business structures are wrapped up in the idea that getting things wrong is the first thing you're trying to avoid. And yet, as we all know, I think, in life, the big leaps of progress are almost always made through making mistakes and learning through making mistakes. It's how we learn as children. Why should it be any different to how we learn as adults?
Sure. So in that early experience at Mars, is there a moment in time that stands out to you to think, I've just completely messed that up, but I've learned a lot from it and I won't do that again?
Oh, probably quite a lot, as I think about it. And I think that for me, the most challenging period was, so I did 6 months running a production line, and then my second job in Mars was as a territory salesman, and in East 17, and I remember it was a Ford Orion, boot full of confectionery, and you were turning up at corner shops, largely Asian or Cypriot run. If you go to East 17, you'll know that's still true today. And it was having the arrogance knocked out of you because and it's why Mars did it, by the way, because you're almost inevitably arrogant at that age. You're 22 years old, you're earning more money than you ever imagined you would. You're being told daily you're the future leaders of the business and that you've been selected from the thousands of applicants. So you're feeling pretty full of yourself. And you walk through a corner shop, and the first words that, if I can apologise to the lazy room, from the owner of the shop is "fuck off." That's a great start to the sales process. And they had the mistaken belief that they actually owned their shops and controlled the display of confectionery, whereas of course you knew that in fact that was your job, and that you knew much better than them how to run their shops. And 6 months of doing that and failing a lot more than you were succeeding really knocked a lot of corners off.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And if you've experienced a few, I'll say, toxic leaders in that context, what made them toxic?
I love Les. I mean, I learned so much from him. I mean, the thing that I use the word toxic because his solution to almost everything was aggression. And so that's how he dealt with conflict. And it had worked well from him down the mines, and he'd sort of stuck with that as a basic leadership skill. I think in the kind of broader sense of toxicity, it goes to what great leadership looks like more generally. And I have seen many examples, I'm clearly not going to name any, of where I see leaders, if not destroying, certainly damaging their organisation. I do think ego and arrogance are at the core of a tremendous amount of that. You get to the top of an organisation and forget everything you've learned along the way. I'm a state school kid, so my entire knowledge of the public school fagging system is Tom Brown's School Days. But there is this kind of idea that every first former thinks that the sixth formers are behaving outrageously, and when they're a sixth former, they're not going to behave like that. And then when they get there, it's kind of, well, it was good enough for me, so I'm going to beat up the first formers again. And as in that sort of Dickensian image, that's the reality in many businesses I've been in. People at the top of organisations, forgetting where they come from, forgetting what they learnt along the way. And I understand why it happens, because the challenge of running big organisations, you feel under siege, you tend to get quite defensive, everything's your fault and nothing appears to, all the good stuff is being done by everybody else. And so I can kind of understand it, but ultimately that's when you fail as a leader. And I've seen it time and again, people who you might have thought would have been successful when they reached the top of an organisation failing, even though they're incredibly well equipped to do that job.
Yes. And if you're finding yourself as an advisor, friend, speaking to somebody who is at risk of that, what advice can you do? What advice can you bring them?
Well, I mean, I'm a great believer in visible leadership. Like I've worked in big organisations, generally speaking. I had 162,000 people in Sainsbury's. And so it may sound pretty obvious to say your leadership should be visible. I still get stopped in the street, I still get stopped in airports by people that work at Sainsbury's, and because I was literally visible. But how you do that, how you make yourself accessible to the business. We did one of these final war programs at BBC, and I'd been there about 5 years, and the producer came to me and said, the amazing thing is, everyone we speak to seems to have met you. Now, that's not possible. I couldn't possibly have met all the people. But we created a sense that the person at the top of the organisation was a real person to me. We had a suggestion scheme called Tell Justin, not that imaginative, but it meant people had that sense that they had access to the person at the top. So I'm a great believer in visible leadership and everything that goes with that. And do you get over, you must, I think so, I can't remember, it's Channel 4, I think, the programme Undercover Boss.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I kind of just don't get the concept of the programme. The idea that any boss in a business can go undercover. I mean, what? There's the fucking clue.
Yeah.
There was one, my did you see the caravan park one? Like, he had 3 caravan parks and 29 employees, and he managed to go undercover. And he'd been working in the business, man and boy, for about 17 years. I mean, how can you actually make a 1-hour programme out of go and meet the bloody people that work for you and hear what they have to say about the business? And yet that was, it was real. And, I just see it time and time again when I ask advice. I ask people the most basic questions about the cold face of their organisation, and they don't have the first idea. And that to me is incomprehensible.
Okay, that's good. So you've credited relentless focus on values at Sainsbury's for its turnaround. I think it was a phrase, make Sainsbury's great again.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Donald
nicked
it.
Make Sainsbury's great again, but MAGA. How, in your experience, are business leaders focusing enough on values in their organisation?
Well, it's a very broad question. I mean, go back to Mars. Mars was a values-led organisation, and they were deep and profound. I mean, they were the values of the family as individuals, and they brought them to work and lived by it themselves. They still do, and you could see it manifest in the business decision making every day. And sometimes it was just in human behaviour, and sometimes it was in the big decisions the business made. So one of the values was freedom. And the whole idea behind that was to create an environment where people were free because they had the right skills, the right tools, the right financial support to do their job well. But at a macro level, that also manifested in the fact the business decided it would never take on any debt because it wanted complete financial freedom, to run the business for the long term because it was a multi-generational family business. So you could see that value manifesting itself all the way through. And I think that, for me, they're the signposts of what makes a business different. And a business that doesn't have a deep sense of self, values, to use the word, can't, I don't think, weave itself together, because that is what lies at the core of the common purpose of all the people that come to work. I fundamentally believe that people come to work wanting to do a good job. Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of deep and profound belief. And everybody nods when I say it, but actually, every day, myself included, we do things that forget that. I wanted to be a professional footballer. I lacked the talent, but not the self-belief, at least at the time. And there was a clue in my teenage years, because I used to break windows at home in our small yard fairly regularly. And I remember it very clearly. My dad never said, "Why did you do that?" He only ever said, "How did that happen?" And there's a million miles between those two phrases, because one of them assumes intent and the other doesn't. Now, as it happens, it would probably better if he said, "Why did you do that?" Because it probably was closer to intent half the time. But the point is that there was a kind of embedded belief that there's no mileage to be gained from accusing somebody of failing deliberately. And I see that in business all the time, in the way people react, whether it is the kind of metaphorical shooting of messengers. But we do it. We treat people who bring us bad news badly. That person. And then we're surprised they stop bringing us bad news. And then you say to them, "Why didn't you tell me?" And they're sort of, what's going on inside their head when you're saying, "Why didn't you tell me this?" Because the last time you kicked me in the nuts. Yeah. So why would I tell you this time? So, that, to me, is a kind of, it's called personal value. But it says something about, if people are choosing to work with you in your firm, you should respect them as human beings, assume that they're coming to work to try and do a good job. And if they're failing to do a good job, that's probably your fault. It's probably your fault. They don't know what a good job looks like. They don't have the skills to do a good job, the tools to do a good job, the budget to do, whatever the reason is, but it's probably not their fault. And even if it is, it's the wrong place to start in altering performance. But it all comes back to this idea of recognising that the trade between an employer and an employee is not the financial one. It's everything else that makes the place that you run and work in a great place to work. I wanted people, when I joined Sainsbury's, people went to the pub on a Friday night, and people said, "Where do you work?" And they said, "In retail." And they hoped that the person wouldn't say where, because Sainsbury's was on its knees. And I wanted people, I actually expressed it in these terms, to go in the pub and say, "Sainsbury's. I work in Sainsbury's, and I'm proud to work there." And that's why making Sainsbury's, when we did Making Sainsbury's Great Again, it sounded like a trite line. And I remember the Guardian business journalist sitting in the front row of the room, was presenting to 70 journalists, and she guffawed, literally out loud, when I said it. And I saw her writing more bollocks from management speak. And there was a golden moment about 4 years later when she wrote an article about the success of the Making Sainsbury's Great Again turnaround, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. So, values lie at the core of all of that. And I think the other supplement is that there should be sort of human values, personal values about how you deal with people and each other and run the business. And then I think there's a whole different narrative. We used to talk about colleague values and customer values. And the colleague values were how we were with each other. And then the customer values were the position that we wish to have in the communities of which we were part. The role we took in having safe, healthy food, the role we took in communities. We wanted it to be a fantastic place to work, great place to work was one of our values. And it was the business narrative of why we were different as a retailer. And it's what led to some of the things like the Paralympics came directly from the values core of the organisation.
Okay. I'm intrigued, where do values come from? Because I was looking at Enron's values about 6 weeks before they went wrong, and they sounded wonderful. Integrity, authenticity, humility, that sort of stuff, but clearly not lived in that context. So how do you live a value?
Well, because you live it. I remember when I was an angrier young man than I am now. I'm still angry, I'm just not so young. And I used to think it's a kind of mission, goal and values thing. I found a little bit, sort of up here somewhere, and why was it relevant? And it kind of doesn't matter what you call it, mission, goal, values, purpose, whatever. But ultimately, and I go back to Mark's experience again, they have to be real. And to be real, they have to be relevant. So, you can't just sort of dream up 5 words that you think sound great on a piece of paper. They do actually have to be able to sort of manifest in your business. Whether that be, if you say your 5 values are X, are those words on your performance review form? I can't tell you how many businesses I see, they say, we've got 5 values. And I say, how do you measure them? And they look at me and say, well, you measure your turnover and you measure your P&L. How do you measure your values? And they look at it as a trick question. Well, they must be real. They must be valid in the business. Otherwise, you obviously can't measure them. We used to have a phrase, again, when I say it, it sounds a bit lame, but it was we used to talk about love. And that stood for live our values every day. And so we had a recognition system inside the business, which you'd get a love card, which stood for live our values every day. And so, if I went around stores, I used to have these love cards. It just sounds lame when I say it now, doesn't it? It really did work. And I started having in my car these cards, and if I saw someone doing something, I'd handwrite a note.
Yeah.
And it became such a big part of the business. My pen, because I used an ink pen because I went to a school that made you write in ink, actually became an icon in the business. And people come up to me and say, would you sign a signature with your pen? Because it became an icon of the business. It was kind of nothing to do with me. It was just a physical manifestation of what we were trying to do around the values.
Okay. And would anybody give you a love card?
I did on occasion get one. And there's a very interesting story behind that. We in the earlier days, before we sort of refined it, we'd had like lots of big companies do, you had a kind of points mean prices recognition system, a bit like sort of Green Shield stamps or whatever. And we'd been running it for about 18 months, and I got some data, and the points were not being, from the company that was running it, and the points weren't being redeemed. And so I had a bit of a hissy fit, and this is a disaster, and it's not working, and colleagues don't value this, and so on and so forth. And I started asking, because I visited stores every Friday, probably 3 out of 4 probably, and I started asking colleagues in store, have you ever had any points, and what do you do with them? And it turned out, this goes back to the pen, because I signed every certificate for points. People were taking them home to show their family, look, I've got a letter from Justin with the points, having them framed, and then displaying them at work. And they had to send the letter in to the redemption company to get the points. And they didn't want to lose the letter. They wanted to keep the letter because that was more valuable to the points. So we had to find a way of allowing them to redeem the points without getting rid of the letter, because that was actually the thing. Well, actually what we did is we took the points away and just did the letter, because it saved a pile of money. Profit is still one of my values. But you suddenly realised actually there was something else going on. It was recognition. And recognition does not have to be financial. And it was amazing how powerful it was.
And we were chatting.
I've still got a cheque someone sent me.
Okay.
Somewhere in my Sainsbury's file.
Very good. And we were chatting about moral values and your moral compass, and we hear other values. Can you think of a time when your values have been under pressure or challenged, and what you did?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my earlier point. They are meant to be hard. They are meant to be hard. And otherwise, they're not differentiating. I had a boss once, and he said, before you settle on something as being a point of difference, stick the word no in the sentence. Because when you put the word no in the sentence, you're articulating something which obviously no one would do, then the sentence without no in can't be differentiating. It's motherhood and apple pie. It's got to be difficult. It's got to stretch. It's got to be the kind of thing a lot of people say, actually, I'm not going to do that. It's too much. It's too difficult. And for me, it comes back to that treating people like they come to work, wanting to do a good job. It's really, really hard. I remember 6 months into Sainsbury's, and not much had gone right. I remember having a chat with one of our bankers and saying, crikey, everything's happened in my first 6 months that you'd never want to happen in a career. He said, no, you've not been fired yet. And he seemed quite focused on the idea that I should be quite soon. So I was actually, for 5 years running, I was Paddy Power's favourite supermarket chief exec to get fired on January the 1st.
Okay, what were the odds?
They were really short odds, actually. Yeah, I was favourite every year for 5 years. They actually do run a book. I don't know whether they still do now, but they run a book with which chief exec supermarket chief exec was going to get fired first. I've lost my thread. So 6 months in, and I remember just one of those, at some point in time, someone's got to walk through the door with good news. And I sat there, and actually I didn't have an office, and so that's another story, but I'm sitting in my meeting room, and I said, the next person walks through that door, gives me bad news, I'm just going to shoot them. And they walked through, the next person through the door, walked through the door, gave me bad news. And it kind of, at that moment, where do you go? Do you actually double down and say, sit down, tell me about it, how did it happen? Or do you say, do you know, just for once, bang. And I so wanted to do bang, because I'd have felt better for a short period of time. And I sat them down and went on. So that's where it's hardest, when it really feels like it's the hardest thing to do, to live by your values. That's when it really has value, because most people balk at that point.
Okay, thank you. So 10 years at Sainsbury's, and then you've made a leap to private equity.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what attracted you to private equity and Terra Firma.
Well, I never really thought about it as a move to private equity. I was very young as a chief exec. I did 10 years, which less than 10% manage, because generally the end of life for FTSE 100 chief execs is getting fired. They call it spending more time with their family, but it's getting fired. And so I had this kind of idea of a two-term presidency. There was a time when I was one of the 20 longest-serving chief execs of FTSE 100 and one of the 20 youngest. There was a kind of, my PR company did me a little certificate. So I didn't feel like I was at that stage a lot of people do of to going plural, non-executive directorships. But I wanted to do something different. I didn't want my tombstone just to say, the bloke what did Sainsbury's. And the unique opportunity at Terra Firma and working with Guy was that Terra Firma's private model is ownership, it's not investment really. We buy businesses, it's controlled investment. And the journey of ownership is essentially we buy broken businesses and we make them better. That's what it says on our values. We build better businesses, that's what we do. And I like the idea of building better businesses. I think that's what private equity should do. I think it should sell businesses after its stewardship that's better than when it bought them. And it's more valuable because it's better, not because just the financial structuring has thrown out a bunch of cash too. Notwithstanding that that's worthwhile work, because a lot of balance sheets are very lazy. So I found a kindred spirit in Guy, philosophically, in that regard. And for various reasons, Terra Firma had challenges because of, in particular, EMI, but not exclusively. And so there were 9 businesses in Terra Firma. So I had this sort of kind of plural career, day one, 9 businesses, all in various stages of the building process. And so a nice variety, only one retailer, so I could escape the stamp of being a bloke that does retail, and a lot of stuff that I knew nothing about. And I just have a kind of insatiable desire for knowledge. I hate feeling comfortable. I hate feeling, my grandmother used to have itchy feet or ants in my pants, and kind of I do. And so for me, it was the appeal of just a completely new set of challenges. But because we own the businesses, it's very hands-on, and I don't sit on the boards as a non-exec, but we are taking a really active role in running businesses, and I like that.
Are there things?
That's why I've got dirty shoes, because I've been on site today with a business that we're looking at buying, and they haven't laid the grass.
Now we're wondering. So, are there things that
I'd have to shoot you if I told you, obviously.
I don't doubt it. Are there things that you brought to Sainsbury's that you're hoping to bring to the private equity business as a whole?
Yeah, look, I fundamentally believe that a great management team can make a huge difference, and picking the right people for the job and coaching them, because I suppose my role is more like a coach now than really hands-on, to do the job in a way that I believe works best, is part of my role now. And in my first year in the job, I probably changed 50% of all the directors of the 9 companies. Executives, non-execs, there were non-execs on boards, I couldn't see the value that they added. I wanted the board smaller and sharper, so I brought them in, because you don't need a lot of people to make fast and clear decisions, in my view. But you need the right variety, because you want to ensure that you've got different views around the table. So it's been, for me, a kind of a variety of train sets to play with. And look, when you become a chief exec, there's a kind of I talked earlier about arrogance, and I think to be a brilliant leader of a business, you do have to be this. It's probably close to some kind of bipolar disorder, because you do have to have a level of arrogance. It's a scary thing. If you wake up every morning thinking, oh my God, there's 162,000 people depending on me, that's a pretty scary thing. So you have to have a kind of deep inner confidence that you're the right person to be doing the job and no one could do it better, and you have to take, because all you do as a chief exec is make all the decisions the business can't. All businesses are bureaucracies to a greater or lesser extent, and are very capable of making the right decisions most of the time. The stuff that lands on the desk of the chief exec is the stuff the business can't do. So you get all that stuff. So you have to have a level of inner confidence, which is borderline arrogance. But it has to be combined with humility, because if you ever actually believe that that's true, you're in big trouble. Big trouble. Because you've got to wake up every day thinking, there's probably a piece of information somewhere that I don't have, that somebody does, that could help us make this decision better.
Yes.
And that kind of basic insecurity runs through. And so, that's the challenge that I try and bring to the businesses that we have now. And perhaps I can be the kind of, the voice on the shoulder of, remember, you're not as good as you think you are, and introduce a little bit of insecurity if I see, arrogance bordering on chutzpah. And when you see the story of businesses that fail, it's amazing how often the narrative is kind of everybody in the business knew except the person at the top. It's just amazing how often that's the narrative.
So when you're putting in new management teams, new leadership teams, what do you look for in those teams?
Well, look, we're a big believer in smarts, and I always have been. I think bright people goes a long way, and so it was part of it. Back to the Mars thing again. They started with, they thought, great raw material, and smarts was part of that. So we are looking for people who are bright, but kind of in every sense of the word.
Yes. Not
just in the can they add up and can they read and write, but also in terms of what they bring to the job. I'm a great believer that, particularly because your ownership journey is relatively short, we tend to own businesses longer than most. Now, that can be quite an upside-down claim, because generally the longer you own it, the worse it's going. That's basic rule of private equity, not far wrong. But if you're really setting out to do big, strategic, fundamental change, you ain't getting that done in 2 years. You can do financial re-engineering in 2 years, but not fundamental roots and branches, building a better business. And so, ideally, you're trying to find someone that can do the whole journey. That might not always be possible. In the early days, it might be very focused on a business that's got an existential crisis, and somebody with a very financial background is the right thing to do. But then you might move into a build or organic growth period, which might require quite different skills. So not being frightened about changing midstream if you have to, and we have a reasonable history in doing that, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But I suppose the tip I always, if I'm asked what's the one tip on recruiting, I always say never do warm and vertical recruiting. And we all do it. You're warm, you're vertical, I've got a vacancy, that will do. And the pressure to fill a job weighs really heavy on the recruitment process, because you're absolutely convinced that you need someone, and that it's a real vacancy, and something's not getting done as a result of that someone being there. And you end up recruiting someone that you then regret. And all of the recruitments I regret are the ones where I knew they weren't quite good enough, but I thought they'll do for now. And sit on the vacancy and find the right person. And my CEOs hate me for this, because the number of times they send me people, because I sign off all director appointments across the business, and I'll see them and I'll say they're not good enough. And they've completely coalesced around that individual. And then every time I do it, and I tell them why I don't think they're good enough, they say, yeah, you're kind of right, but we've just felt under pressure to fill the job. Well, go and find the right person. Having great people around you makes your job so much easier. And again, it sounds obvious, but I can't tell you how many people I've seen who feel threatened by having great people working for them. And because they feel threatened by you try and take my job. Well, yeah. But I had when I had the board of Sainsbury's, I've had, in my 10 years at Sainsbury's, I had roughly 20 directors, and 7 or 8 of them are chief execs of other businesses. And I love the fact that everyone around the table was good enough to do my job, because it made my job easier. Why wouldn't you? The best example I ever saw of that was Alan Layton, who I worked for at Mars, and I worked again for Asda. Alan wouldn't mind me saying it to me, he is amongst, if not the most inspirational leader I've ever worked for. But he isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. So he loves surrounding himself with people who are super, super bright. And then every meeting he says, oh, I don't understand any of this, is all complete mystery to me, you guys work it out. It was genius, because it meant he could be lazy as well. Because everybody else, but he recognised where his limitations were, and he filled the gap. Archie's great brilliance in recruiting Alan, because they squabbled like little bloody children for the 7 years they worked together. Just squabble all the time, because he didn't get out, really. But his brilliance in recruiting Alan was that he saw in Alan all the toolkit, all the skill set he didn't have. And he said, I can't do what he does. I'm going to recruit him to fill the gap. And between the two of them, they were a spectacular chief exec, but there were 2 of them.
Interesting, thank you. I'm going to ask one question and then open up to the room for some questions. And that's just, how do you, or what does work-life balance look like for you, and how do you maintain it?
Gosh, who knows? I'm still working on it. Look, I'm divorced, and probably part of that is because I didn't get it right. So I'm second time round. I've got a couple of stepkids. I'm trying to find a different balance. In the end, though, what drives me, what the engine inside me, I fulfil through work. I fulfil through doing challenging jobs. And I said earlier, I like feeling uncomfortable. I wanted to be a professional sportsman. Now, I've discovered, actually, there's a lot in common. Almost every professional sportsman I've met, good one, wants to be successful in business. I mean, Ian Botham was one of my boyhood heroes, and I've got to know him. And it was so disappointing to discover that actually Ian really didn't like cricket. He was just very good at it. And he once said to me, I so want to be you. And I said, I so want to be you. All that stuff you did, I would love to have done all that. And because it's the same thing that drives. So it's very difficult to have that inside you and actually find the balance, because the other things that are important in life, like family and friends and the things you do with your time, are in conflict with it all the time. So you have to manage it consciously. And I'm religious. I've done jobs for 15 years that meant I've never had a weekend, really. Because, broadly speaking, that's when people shop. So I'm religious about weekends, as much as one can be. Most of the time, there's nothing that can't wait until Monday morning, and so it waits until Monday morning. I try not to do back-to-back travel, because it's really easy to be away home for 3 or 4 weeks, and you think, how did that happen? My son, some will know, is an international sportsman. I try and follow him. That adds an extra dimension, because that's in the States now, so I've done lots of weekend trips. I mean, at the time at Sainsbury's, it was not an unusual week for me. At the time my son was a karter and racing in Europe, I did 35 weekends abroad 1 year, leaving the office or store visits on a Friday night, late plane to usually Italy or France or somewhere, and then getting back to my flat in London at 4 a.m. in the morning, having taken him back to school, and then in the office at 6. And I did that for about 7 years, so there was no balance there.
No.
I loved it,
yes,
but it probably would have killed me if I kept doing it. So, like anything else, you manage it. It's not something that comes naturally for me, so you have to manage it.
Okay, thank you. I'd love to hear some questions. I'm sure you have a few questions to ask. If you raise your hand, people will come with a mic.
Psychologically and qualitatively, can you describe the transition from being in charge of 162,000 people to being in charge of, 10, from having 20 people report to you directly with a sort of huge level of intensity to having not very many and being far more self-reliant? How has that affected you, or have you found it easy or pleasant even?
I sort of don't really see the distinction that you just described, because ultimately my leadership style, I believe, and people that work for me would bear this out, is very empowering. I've liked surrounding myself all my life with really good people, and don't have a dog and bite yourself. And therefore, for me, what I'm doing now is the same thing. I'm really interested in the detail of the business. You know, so we have a cattle ranching business in Australia. We own 550 square kilometres of Australia, and somewhere out there are 330,000-ish cows. It's a very strange thing. So the first thing I did was I went down, spent a week, and went out on the farm and worked with the cowboys, because that's what they are. And people said, well, how can that possibly be a good use of your time? But for me, it was just the same philosophical thing, which is I couldn't have the conversation I wanted to have with the chief exec in that business unless I understood what the business was. So I don't see it being that different. You know, I really, really don't want to do his job for him. He's actually a really excellent chief exec. But to help him do his job better and challenge him when I don't think he's doing it well, I needed to understand the job he was doing. And that's what I've always done, whether as a chief executive of the board for the last 10 years of my corporate career, or, you know, it's my job title. By the way, never put the word vice chairman in your job title, because everyone thinks that means you don't actually really do anything, because I do actually work full-time with Terra Firma. But it's head of portfolio businesses, and I'm not in a legal sense, but I'm like a sort of surrogate executive chairman of all those businesses. So it doesn't feel like that much of a change, actually, except there's 9 of them, which adds a level of complexity.
One other thing, I did actually meet Alan Layton a few years ago, and I remember 3 things from him. He said, the only things you've got to remember about managing a business is cash flow, customers, and colleagues. And that's it. Very simple. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I do actually a speech called The 10 C's of Leadership, so I think
well,
it's
all into 3
yeah.
principal ones, actually, which is, you probably learned to
I think I stole them all from Alan, or he stole them from me. There was a Walmart, actually, philosophically, Walmart bought Asda, and I had a year working for Walmart, which was very interesting. And Walmart, one of their corporate values was copy shamelessly with pride. And so their idea is there's no such thing as an original idea, just nick everybody else's. And, no, look, I mean, absolutely. I fundamentally believe, you may have heard me say it, the word colleague. I think it's a deep and profound word. I have a problem with the word staff. You know, I grew up in the 1970s in the Midlands, watching Red Robbo, Fight Management, whilst they'd all forgotten that it was actually Japanese and Germans that were nicking their jobs. And I didn't understand why he kept talking about management and why the management kept talking about to workers. And they're all colleagues in a collective endeavour. And the word colleague kind of almost forces upon you a different mindset. So I'm a great believer in the idea that you're all colleagues, part of one team. That's my sort of core idea. All businesses have a customer, and making sure you really understand who your customer is core to business success. You may not actually directly do business with that customer. The business I was looking at this morning, I had to ask the question 5 or 6 times before they actually told me who their real customer was. And it wasn't the person they're selling the thing that they sell to. It's actually somebody a notch further down the supply chain. So customers, one of my little bombats is customers and colleagues at the heart of everything we do. And again, that's a very, very high bar, because what usually happens in the corporate world is shareholders or owners sit in the centre of the table. And the best way to serve your shareholders is to start with your customers and colleagues. It really is that way around. I just believe that deeply. So yeah, customers, colleagues, absolutely. Culture and everything we talked about, and your values are part of culture. And part of that is communication. You know, the bigger the business, the more you should communicate. And you know, again, I know it's a trite line, one of them and 2 of them, use them in that proportion. It's very, very hard to listen. Very hard to listen. And it's actually a proactive thing, because you have to create an environment where people feel able, another C, by the way, to challenge. And actually, in most corporate structures, the further down the organisation they go, the less permission people believe they have to challenge. And yet, the more knowledge they have, in most instances, of the real issues in the business. It's a kind of paradox. That's why you have these situations. Everybody knew it was going wrong, just nobody told the boss.
Yeah.
That's got to be the boss's fault.
Any more questions, Paul? I'm sure there are a few in the room.
Thank you. The first point was an observation to Phil, really. I don't know why you asked Justin about work-life balance. Surely working for Mars, you worked out how to work, rest and play. Oh, man. Wow. I suppose the fundamental question I had was, I'm really interested what you're talking about, colleagues and values. It's something I'm trying to work on, and I find one of the most difficult things is to really live values for real, and I see particularly in leadership that isn't replicated. Very good at espousing what values are, what our mission statement is, but the leaders themselves don't actually execute that. And certainly one of my mantras is actually coming to work and work with outstanding colleagues. We all know those people you come to work with, and it just makes the day feel good because they're just so outstanding. Yeah. You mentioned the measurement of values. I'm just intrigued. It can be very subjective. How do you drive actually checking that balance on values in individuals?
Well, look, I recognise the observation you make about leaders espousing values and then not living by them. And it's amazing how little things can cause tremendous damage. Walking on a plane with junior colleagues and you turning right and then you turning left and then turning right. So why? It makes no sense at all to me, because surely their time's valuable too. And if you believe there's a justification in terms of your ability to land somewhere in 8 hours' time and work hard, that applies to the young and junior person that's travelling with you. You can't have, Mars had equality, it was one of Mars's values. And that meant everyone flew the same class. And as it happens, business class, because Mars took the view that if you were travelling for business, you should be treated well. The number of times I see thrift policies in business that don't apply to the senior people, it just drives me nuts. So, and one of the things I try and say to people in business, though, is that the further up the organisation you get, the more you are dealing with ambiguity. You're often challenged to behave in a way, lead in a way, manage in a way that you don't see your boss actually living by. And that's when you're really tested. Is it really in your DNA? Do you become them, or do you stay true to what you once believed in? It's back to my sort of fagging system. And I always sort of I'm going to try, when I get there, kind of what's the point of getting there if you're not going to live by all of this stuff? In terms of the whole idea of values and how you make them real and how you measure them, it is kind of every day in every way, and you find ways of making them live. So when we did the Tell Justin suggestion scheme, and in my time we had 70,000 suggestions, about 10,000 of them implemented in the business. Every single one of them for the first year, all 7,000 in the first year, I personally signed a letter to colleagues in response, even if it was no, and we explained why it was no. But part of what it was to get people to understand the values mattered. So you couldn't send in a Tell Justin suggestion unless you explained why it supported one of the values of the organisation. So you got people thinking about, well, why am I doing this? I'm doing it because we hate waste, and I see this computer printout shooting off every day and we throw it in the bin, and that's a waste. So that's the value that it supports. The number of times I get letters from colleagues saying, given one of our values is respect for the individual, how do you explain that my manager's just treated me like this? Of course, the answer is, I can't, because he's just done something that doesn't live by that value. So you make them live in the business in every way you can. And then literally measure them. Whatever type of listening survey you do in your business, employee surveys, McKinsey do something called OHI, I'm not a big fan of that, but we did something called We're Listening, and it was part, store managers with bad We're Listening surveys couldn't get promoted and couldn't get their bonus. Now, people really get that it matters if it switches off the money. Really get that it matters if it switches off the money. And we did it, I remember one year, I as I sometimes do, had a bit of a rant on stage at our store managers conference, because I'd gone outside in one of the sessions that was on stage, and there were a bunch of store managers fagging it outside. And I had this big rant on stage saying it's completely outrageous, you're representing your stores, the disrespect you've shown to the people that are standing on the stage, the disrespect to your colleagues who you're representing here today, I feel like firing you all, obviously completely lost sight if they come and work, want to do a good job at that moment, and had to be great. And then afterwards, our head of comms said to me, she said, you know, what we should do is, how about this as an idea? Genius. Store managers can only come to the conference if their colleagues vote that they are allowed to go. And so what happened was, we did this, and about 100 store managers, their colleagues voted that the store managers shouldn't be allowed to go. And these store managers initially thought, you know, and then they realised it was their colleagues telling them that they didn't respect him as a leader. And suddenly the store managers really, really wanted to go to the conference and be voted by their colleagues. And the only way they were able to do that was to convince the colleagues that they were actually going to get some feedback and some communication. And actually what we changed it to was every colleague council, we had one in every store, got to vote the people that they sent to the conference, depending on how big the store was, anything between 3 and 5 people. And the store manager only got to go if he drove them there in his car. And it was so powerful. So there are loads of things you can do to make them live and real.
Justin, I want to thank you for sharing some of your leadership insights with us. Can you just give Justin a round of applause? So part of our work is to try to raise exactly these things, what makes for great leadership, and in our own little way we're having a good go at a stretch goal for us, which is to launch a leadership academy in the island in the new year, all being well, called Nexus, and that will be to help hopefully attract some leaders from off-island to experience what the island can offer in terms of leadership, but also our work, and a kind of off-site environment. With the core ethos of what makes for good servant leadership and how we can learn from each other as leaders, what can we grow and discover, how can we engage our people, how can we create good strategic plans for our businesses. So you're very welcome to find out a bit more about that. We've given you a little chocolate flyer. It's chocolate, it's, you know, got a chocolate. Just to...
Isn't servant leadership in that book?
And there's a servant leadership book, there is. There's a book called...
I've never read a book on business.
No, there is one. It's not very good.
It's not quite true. There are a couple of books I'd recommend.
Which are?
Well, what we're talking about, Gung Ho, actually. My back on.
Yeah.
There we go. Gung Ho is a book that it only takes 2 hours to read. That's why I've managed to read it, because it's just about inside my attention span. Gung Ho, you know, kind of suspend your British scepticism or cynicism, whichever it is for you, and just kind of read it and see it for what it is, which is a great articulation of the whole idea that values matter, that worthwhile work causes people to bring much more of themselves to work, and that the leadership role is to enable that, to facilitate it and to cheer it, and then you have a lot less management to do. So it's a great articulation of that, but it is about squirrels and beavers and geese, which kind of gets a bit folksy.
Sounds like my kind of book. Gung Ho, you heard it here first. Maybe there's a book in
Sheldon Bowes and somebody else's.
Okay. So all being well, we're trying to just gather some of these ideas. We're trying to bring the best of the islands as well. That kind of mixture of experiences that we have here, and despite some of the frustrations that the island has. One of the beauties is we can mix different experiences very quickly. We can quickly be in a manufacturer, through to a lawyer, through to civil service environments, and blend quite a rich experience of ideas. So love to hear your thoughts on that as you explore this with us a little bit, and we'll need your help, I think, to help make that happen, but I'll be asking for some of that. Just show your appreciation again to Justin. Thanks again, Justin.